So for today, I have a couple of things that I want to cover. And like I said at the start, I by no means will be able to cover any one particular grant in super detail, but my idea today is to get you sort of starting to think about the importance of grants, why you might actually submit for one, what the funding sort of life cycle is and how this works, getting you started with small awards and prizes that you can apply for, where to actually find some of these things, some general advice on how to write your application, who reviews them, the complicated stuff. So this is where we're going to get to talk about budgets, some of the harsh realities that we have to face with success rates and also the world we live in now and the post-COVID world, and also some final general advice and resources for you all to get started with. You know the drill, I've reiterated this 1,000 times. I'm not an expert. I rely on Google as much as you all do, and also the expertise of the Hub, with who I am eternally grateful for sending me their resources and materials. In particular, I want to give a shout out to Mel McGrath, who just really shared her personal experiences of recently applying for a fellowship and being super successful in that. So it was really good for me to get an insight from a student who'd recently gone through all of this. Please feel free to interrupt me at any stage with any questions or feedback that you might have. I'm totally cool with you just switching on your mic and yelling through, and that's fine by me, or you can also post in the chat. I do have that open and we'll be checking. I will flag that all the advice here kind of mixes between small grants and also larger prizes and awards, but all of it should sort of be relevant for no matter what you're applying for. And I will flag throughout that you should always be discussing if you choose to apply for something with your supervisory team. So you don't walk away from here being like, Narissa said I should apply for an award. I do not want to be responsible for that. Some acronyms just to get us started. I don't actually dive into necessarily all of these acronyms, but I'm sure you've heard your supervisors or someone around you throw around the word DECRA and RIC. My personal story when I first actually was hired at Melbourne was I was talking to Brock and he kept saying to me, yeah, and you need to get in touch with Rick and you'll figure these things out with Rick. And I kept thinking Rick was a person, like that's a name, only to realize that's the Research, Innovation and Commercialization unit we have here at the University of Melbourne. So here's your quick referral guide for some of these acronyms so you don't end up thinking you're talking to, I don't know, Rick exactly like I did. So the importance of grants. I think the way that we view the reason why you probably want to apply for this and start getting into the life cycle of grants is that it really demonstrates that someone somewhere wants to invest into you and your research. So they see some noted value within that where they go, yep, I want to hand over X amount of money for you to be able to pursue it further or to pursue all your dreams or to simply, quite frankly, keep you alive. It's not the gold standard. Just because you don't necessarily get such large grants or because you haven't yet gotten a grant doesn't now mean that your work isn't of value, but it's sort of just a recognition at least. You'll also will need money to support your research. So all of us are probably at the moment facing the harsh reality of COVID and having to shift to online testing, and that probably hasn't necessarily worked with the RE people. And so you're trying to take paid pool, and that requires money. So you do need money to be able to support your own research as well. You'll also need money, quite frankly, to support you. So postdoc fellowships are usually salaries that keep you alive and you being able to do your research. And universities as well, like if you're able to get some sort of salary from an external funding body, that makes you sort of more palatable and to a university because it means that they don't have to pay you as much or they don't have to pay you at all because you sought the funding from an external source. So again, it just demonstrates that the research that you're doing is kind of a value and they want to see it pursued further, and that someone has clearly also taken interest in that. The other frank thing is that it's going to fit into your career progression. So as further along you go, you'll be asked for more grants. How many have you applied for? What have you been successful from? And in particular, where from? So it is something that you're going to have to start prepping as you go through, particularly if you go down an academic pathway. Fundings and awards become sections of your CV, so starting to populate them is going to be a requirement. And it also becomes important to diversify your funding. So it's not necessarily just about going for large government funded bodies like the ARC, but also small community grants, organisation prizes. So if you belong to SPSP or SAS, they have prizes as well. And consulting as well is something that mid-career and late career people are looking into a lot more. I won't get into consulting today, but if anyone does have any interest with that, please feel free to let me know. I think the other thing that I want to flag is, as I was sort of creating these slides and this topic, I realized that maybe there needs a part 2 where we dive into a little bit more explicit detail of stuff or discuss all the other different avenues for grant funding. So if you have a particular interest in that, please feel free to let me know and we can look into creating a part 2 to this as well. So like I flagged at the start, and what I really want to reiterate now is that you should be discussing everything with your supervisory team and figure out the best strategy that works for you. Your time might be better spent getting publications and doing your research that supports your track record in order to get funding down the line. It is kind of the way that we view this, it's a delegate dance where you get to the point to show potential so that someone funds you versus being able to capitalize actually on that research and do your research. The thing that you will realize as I start talking through all of this is that grants take a lot of time and they take a lot of effort. And so you have to realize whether you have to sort of make a decision as to whether it's the right thing for you right now to be pursuing something like that. Your priority right now really is to be building your skills and be building your CV. And so you need to talk to your supervisory team about, if you find something, is this the right thing for me to be doing right now? So this is taken from RIC, so the Research, Innovation and Commercialization team. And so they talk about the 5 steps of the funding life cycle. So the way that they view it is it's a constant circle of sourcing. So first finding what is the grant that you want to apply for, what is the prize that you're seeking out. Pre-award, so what do you have to do? Everything to prepping for it, to letting the right people know that you're also applying for it. So there are things like notices of intent that you have to let the university know if you're going to apply for something. After the pre-award, once you've done all the work that's necessary to put in for the application, you get the acceptance, and then you start doing your amazing research, or you get your money. You've survived all of that, you get to post-award, which also requires some reporting for you to do, or you've kind of need to extend things, or have you done all your deliverables in your research? And then again, that requires sort of internal processes in terms of not only letting the university know that you're done with this, but letting your funding body know that you've spent all the money and you've delivered everything that you said that you would deliver towards them. So it's this constant cycle of, there are certain things that you have to let the uni know, and this is in particular mostly for large grants. So the university wants to be able to keep track of what we're applying for and also to assist us with that process. To the very end, which is, well, have you done everything that you said that you would do in a grant? One of the things that Katie appropriately pointed out to me is, please celebrate the fact that you submit for a grant or funding. It does take a lot of work, and this is the one thing that you really have control over. So you put in all the effort to apply for a grant, you did whatever it took to follow all their rules and guidelines. Celebrate that. That's the thing you really have the most control over. It's not to say that you shouldn't celebrate if you're accepted, of course you should, but that becomes more of a sort of lottery sometimes. So the acceptance stage is really sometimes out of your control, depending on who your reviewers are, depending on how many people apply for a grant. So celebrate what you can control, not what you can't control. The other thing that I think is probably obvious in this sort of funding life cycle that's missing is you're probably also going to get rejected a bunch of times. So even the most successful applicants have definitely had one of their grants rejected at some stage. I think Brock recently shared a hilarious story with me where he got a certain bunch of reviews and he just thought, you know what, nope, not pursuing this any further. Like that's, so this is definitely going to happen to you as well, which means you sort of take this deviated path and start all over again. Take the feedback on board as well. If they provide you that feedback, fix your grant as much as possible and just start it again. So don't get also too downhearted about this. It's probably going to happen to you. My advice really is that it's never too early to start applying for some sort of funding. So I have really been putting in more of an effort to share with you guys prizes, student prizes and awards that exist out there. Awards in psychology or your specific area of research that you're in, and also associations and groups that you belong to. So if you belong to SBSB, if you belong to SASP, if you belong to the APS or the APA, they have best dissertation awards, best paper awards, best person that does moral psychology, best, interesting topic, or, poster presentation as well. These are little ways that you can build up in this, because they also have the same sort of side of sometimes, funding guidelines and instructions that they want you to follow. So it really starts to dip your feet into this sort of area. The other thing that I really encourage as well is that you just start looking so that you know what's out there. I think Mel as well said that, this popped up in one of her searches, but it was really more on Twitter that she found it, and it wasn't really necessarily something that she at first considered even applying for. So that's why I really want you to start just seeing what all the many avenues out there are for you. And also what I'm trying to do is also get them out to you and encourage you to start applying for some of these small things, which usually don't take as much effort as some of the larger grants that we'll talk about. So all of these slides will be made available via the Hub website, and all of these are links. So really start small and then build bigger. So I've linked here different student and prizes and awards that exist according to all these associations. And I also really encourage you to follow the Hub on Twitter, which is really just following me on Twitter, because I'm trying to, again, retweet stuff and share information that exists out there to support PhD students and awards. So I also just did like really super simple searches on Google, where I literally typed in something like moral psychology student award, and stuff came up. Environmental psychology student award, something came up. So there are definitely lots of these little awards that you can start looking into and applying for now. One of the advice that I have is ask your supervisory team for their past grant applications, whatever they might have. The other good thing as well, this is advice for Elise, is that your research is probably funded by a granting agency. So your PhD is probably being supported by a discovery project that your supervisor is on, or perhaps a linkage project. So you can also ask to see what that application looks like, so that you can see how your research is actually being pitched to one of these granting agencies. So when you're sort of struggling to see that bigger picture of what your research program is, you can take a look at it and be like, oh, okay, that's how you sell it to sort of this external audience. The other thing that I also recommend is just do a little bit of stalking. Search up what other students are applying for or being awarded, or if you have a postdoc or a more senior PhD student that you know and admire, take a look at the things that they've been awarded for. So I did some stalking of past students that I went to an American summer school with, and that's where I found that, yeah, there were all these awards that were existing out there in the US that were completely open to international applicants as well. So definitely do some research on the people that you admire, so that you can see as well what small grants they might have applied for, and that would therefore be open for you as well. So where do you find them as well? So on top of your online digital stalking that you're going to do, you're going to start signing up for some of these mailing lists and avenues that exist. So most of these are all freely available just behind the University of Melbourne login. So you're all able as PhD students though to access that. And you can also, for some of these places, create free accounts, again, just using your University of Melbourne login to get in there. So Research Professional sends weekly updates of whatever you select. In terms of, I literally just have like psychology ticked. And so every week I get emails about psychology grants that are out there. The university also has these avenues called Discover Funding and Research Funding, so that you can see what little internal grants exist at the university, and also so that you can take a look at advice and help that they provide for some of these grants as well. The Grants Hub, I've only just started dabbling in. It offers a free 14-day trial, and it also seems to target more wider community grants, so things that sometimes exist out there, for example, charities that are giving money, or my other favorite is, bad businesses who want to give out money so that they can look better, particularly banks love to have small grants out there sometimes because I think that makes them feel better. So again, like you probably have never thought to be funded by the ANZ, but you know, they have these very open grants sometimes that just will give you $5,000 towards your research, and $5,000 is better than nothing. I also really recommend that you get on LinkedIn and Twitter. I feel like I've harped on about this plenty of times in a lot of these student workshops, but on LinkedIn is where you can start following different people and take a look at what grants or things that they offer on there. And on Twitter, by following the people that you know or that you're interested in, is an easy way to also see what's available out there. Take a look at things like hashtag academic chatter. Also, you know, I think in particular as well, I want to, Elise and Katie are super prolific on Twitter. And so they also share when postdocs are on offer or when someone is seeking something. So, you know, these are the people as well that you should be stalking. Sorry, Katie and Elise. I just want to kind of flag this in here in terms of when you're looking at applying for bigger grants or postdoc positions. One of the biggest hurdles that sometimes PhD students report is that they're not quite sure what their research program is. So this sort of bigger picture aspect. It's worth some time now, particularly obviously if you're choosing to continue down an academic pathway and so you're looking for your postdoc position, you need to start thinking about your research program. What do you also think would really benefit from some funding? So, you know, not just necessarily this one study that you have a great idea about, but that you can see that this study would feed onto this, which feeds onto this, etc., etc. You also sometimes have to balance what you're interested in versus what you are an expert on, because there might be something that you're super interested in that you really want to get some funding so that you can get it off the ground. But the thing that's going to be the selling point for you and what gets you probably the grant is the fact that you're an expert on a certain topic. And those two aspects might not necessarily match. So again, you're going to have to try to see, well, look, if I can kind of demonstrate that I'm an expert on X topic, then I can get a little bit more funding, and then I can dabble in some of these research areas or extend it or connect the two, but I'm not necessarily going to be able to apply for that completely Y topic over here because I don't have the skills necessarily for it. It's just something that I'm interested in. So again, kind of broader picture, particularly late stage PhD, and once you start applying for postdoc positions, these are some of the things that you're going to have to start thinking about. All right, so you've done your research, you've done your stalking, you found something that you want to apply for, you found a grant. Now you have to do additional research, which is your grant research. So what are the funding guidelines? As I go through the next couple of slides, I'm going to make you realize that funding guidelines are the gold standard that you have to follow no matter what. Even if you think that their guidelines are completely stupid, you need to follow them. So start reading into them. Who has actually been funded by this scheme before? So one of the things that I really like to do once I find a new grant that I'm interested in applying is seeing if they list their successful applicants on the website, or just literally Googling like, you know, that award and then like 2018, so I can see who was awarded it previously. The other thing is, feel free to email successful recipients and ask for their applications or advice. We're all out here trying to support each other. So particularly as well, I think if I've already gotten that grant, I'm happy to help you now go also for that grant. So reach out to them. If they're not willing to necessarily share their full application with you, they might be able to provide you some advice and insight that you're not necessarily going to get just from reading the website and reading through the really difficult funding guidelines sometimes. My advice here though is definitely tailor your email. So plenty of people have reported to me that sometimes they get really generic emails that's just like, hi, I've noticed that you applied for X. Can you please send me your application? That's kind of a douche move, quite honestly, anyways. And you also want to really demonstrate that you've kind of at least tried to look into this person and be like, hey, I saw you were really successful in this grant, that you're doing research in this area. Would you mind being able to share your application with me? If that isn't comfortable for you, could you please be able to provide some advice? I'm really interested in applying for this grant. Okay, so make sure you really tailor your email. Please always remember that there's a person on the other side of that email that you're sending it Also check in with RIC if they have successful grant applications on file. So RIC does have a lot of ARC, the Australian Research Council, DECRAs and Discovery projects, successful ones that are available to people who are applying for that. So you can also see if they also have any additional insight or advice that they can provide to you as well. And finally, do they provide information on success rates on their website? Or can you at least see, I guess, connected to who were the successful applicants that applied for this? I will again go into the importance of why, but you're going to realize that obviously success rates aren't like 100%. They're definitely lower than that. And so you want to sort of preparing yourself so that you're aware of, okay, this is a great grant that I have and I know that it's got a low success rate, but it's really perfectly targeted towards it. Or, hey, here's a grant I have, but they have a really high success rate and I haven't seen too many people apply for it, so I'm going to go for it. So you're going to sort of, I think, start balancing some of your expectations here as well. So how we tend to write papers is actually quite different to how we write grants. So when you write a paper, we've all sort of been taught the reverse triangle method. So you start really general, you provide all the background research, you then finally get down to the specific argument and significance almost towards the end of your introduction, because that's where you're now hitting them with the knowledge and you're saying, here are all your contributions that make you great and the research that you're going to do out of here, right? So very common to go this upside down triangle method. When we write grants, it's actually the opposite. So you need to be hitting them with your important points from the very get-go. You want to be able to say at the very top of each section, what's the important contribution that you're making, and then only after that are you getting into the general background which supports the research that you're doing. The reason for this is otherwise they're pretty much going to stop reading. If they're not pulled in, if a grant reviewer is not pulled in and sees the importance of the research that you're doing, they're just going to be like, oh, you're giving me background literature and all of this. What's the point of reading? A rule of thumb and sort of general advice that we provide here is that by the end of the first page of your project description in particular, so an area where you're describing what your research is doing, the reader should know what you want to research, why it is vitally important, why it must be done now, and why it can only be done by you and no one else. So they need to be able to really pull out those big picture topics to be able to say, okay, yep, you're the person that needs this funding because only you can do this amazing research and only you can have this impact in the area that you're after. So again, so the upright side triangle here. The other advice is that you need to consider writing your grants as if the reader is constantly thinking, why do I care? And the answer can't just be because no one else has studied it. No one else has done this before. It has to be because it's going to have practical or theoretical implications and you need to outline what those implications and impact are. Advice here is avoid using the word important. So just saying, my research is very important, the end. Show them why it's important. This is the importance. This is why I'm important. These are the things that I can do. This is what I've demonstrated so far, and this is what I can achieve. So this is really about showing them so that once they finish reading your grant, they understand why this is important, not that you just told them that this is important. Do the work. You're going to need to practice your pitch a lot of times with as many people as possible so that you can really refine your core idea and what's the main contribution that you're trying to get out of this grant. The advice here as well is from this point, get as many people to just read the first page of your grant, the first page of your project description, the first sort of couple of paragraphs where you're trying to now do that triangle. And get feedback, and then only move on to the full application stuff, because you really want to be able to, again, to refine that here's your impact that you're making before then you start getting someone to dive into 30 pages of your grant application as well. The other advice here is try to get feedback from people not only inside of your area, but outside. So your reviewers, depending on the scheme, is not necessarily going to be in your area. And it isn't like writing a paper. So when you write a paper, you send it to a journal article, they'll come back and say, you know, here are your reviewers, and your reviewers are usually experts in your field who'll be able to say, well, you didn't use the right method here, or yes, this is a great contribution to this literature sort of thing. You might get a reviewer who is generally in psychology, who completely knows nothing about moral psychology. So you need to be able to pitch to an external audience as well. My advice here is imagine that you're facing Rue as well. Learn to leave your ego at the door. Your grant reviewer's ego is probably bigger anyways. Do the work, but please acknowledge that you need the time. I'm sure we all have stories of applying for a grant very last minute. In fact, there are probably people in this workshop today who I've assisted applying for a grant under insane timelines. It can be done, but it's really not necessarily worth your time. So if this is the first time that you're applying, especially for a big picture grant, you need to understand that your PhD is probably going to suffer a little bit through it as you're trying to, the very first time that you're dealing with funding guidelines, with your research program, etc. Even if it is sometimes also a smaller grant, it is going to be a learning curve for you. So acknowledge that, is this the right thing that you should be doing right now? Or is it perhaps right now I have a great research topic that I'm doing and I have data flying in and I need to handle that so that I can write a paper. So maybe that grant gets pushed aside to another time. Like I said, you're also wanting to get as many people as possible to read your application, which means, again, you need time. You need to develop that draft. They need time to read it. Most reviewers as well, or people that you give it to, aren't going to appreciate if you send them a draft of your grant and say, hey, I need this back by Friday because the application is due at 5 p.m. Editing is also most of the work. So you're gonna, as you've all done with journal articles and you're in your first paper or something like that, you will realize that, the draft your supervisor sees is draft 300, even though it's labeled as draft 1. And the same applies here for grant applications. You're gonna need to do a lot of editing based on the feedback you get, but your own work as well. The other thing that I really encourage here, and what also is going to take up time, is go to as many information sessions as you can, sign up to mailing lists and reading what they offer to you, and go to so many workshops on writing skills. I do provide a list of resources as well towards the end of these slides, and you will see, like I said, if you're applying for something like a DECRA, which is an early career research award for people who are 5 years out of their PhD, there are sessions, 1-hour sessions dedicated to just applying for the grant, 1-hour sessions dedicated to writing for it, 1-hour sessions dedicated to the funding guidelines. So again, time and time and time. Yes, this is probably more advice for bigger grants, but even if you're applying for a small 300-word thing, you'll realize it's sometimes really difficult to write 300 words where you just distill your ideas to that point. When you're writing the application, do acknowledge any difficulties in your research because a reviewer will pick up if any obvious flaws are missing. So don't think that you can now skate over something and just, hope that no one will pick up on it. Don't make large statements without backing it up with any evidence. So make sure that you're really concrete. So this comes back to my point earlier. Don't just say this research is very important. Demonstrate what the importance of it is. Also, don't make grandiose statements like, I'm super great and therefore that's why you should fund me. Again, you're trying to demonstrate your value and why they should fund you, not just getting up on a rooftop and yelling that you're amazing. Do not use lots of jargon or acronyms. So some acronyms are fine, particularly if you're repetitive. So if you're talking, like I keep saying, the ARC, I don't want to have to say Australian Research Council every single time. But if your grant starts to become more acronyms than words, you're going to, again, lose the reviewer or lose the assessor, the person there, because it's just like becomes more effortful for them to be able to keep up with all your acronyms. Don't do any of the following things. So no acronyms, nor organisational peculiarities. So we have sometimes things that are only internal to the University of Melbourne that doesn't necessarily apply to an external audience. Don't go over the page or word limit. I cannot stress this enough. So after my PhD, I worked for a while internally reviewing grants at the University of Queensland, and I got to see assessors and talk to people who were on these panels as the reviewers, and I would literally watch them say, oh, this application has gone 200 words over the limit, bin. So you've put in all this effort and someone has gone, well, you couldn't follow the guideline about the page limit or the word count, and that's it. It's out the window, it's rejected without even someone looking at it, and you do not want to do that to yourself. Don't make these grandiose statements like I'm famous and amazing. Don't overpromise as well. So you still have to deliver whatever you're saying in your grant application. So don't feel like now you're going to say, well, I'm going to have the cure for cancer in 5 years. Probably not going to happen. Don't embellish your publication list. So be careful about putting too many things in prep. or also too many things that yet, sort of are under review, but who knows what might happen with it. Don't use outdated norms to demonstrate your excellence. I think this is probably advice as well for some people who still love using ERA rankings, which is Excellence Research in Australia, I think, journal rankings. So they love putting that in that, particularly I think business school people type love that. And I think we just need to start letting go of it. Don't use excuses as to why you sort of need the money by just saying stuff like, well, I have a really heavy workload and so some money would be necessary for me, but I will do this research. That's not a reason for why someone should be funding. And don't pad out your budget or cut excessively in the hope of seeming more value for money. So I used to sometimes commonly get people who were applying for grants and I was reviewing them for them, and I would say like, hey, your budget is kind of sometimes really small, and they come back to me and say, yeah, but that's just because I didn't want to ask for a lot of funding, and so that's why I should get funding because I haven't asked for a lot. It's like, well, it doesn't really work that way. Again, it's about demonstrating the value in your research, not just saying, well, this is sort of cheaper and this is what I can get away with, okay? And don't now necessarily add thousands upon thousands of dollars in there because you think that that also somehow makes you look better. It doesn't work that way. So if I haven't reiterated enough, please follow the funding rules to the minutiae detail. And also in some cruel instances, as I've realized, try to rein yourself in if you're given too much freedom. So there are sometimes applications out there that have nothing. They're just like, okay, you have 400 words to tell us why we should fund you. And it's like, oh, okay, you don't want me to follow a certain structure. You don't really tell me what necessarily each section might have to include. So, sometimes having free rein or too open can also be a scary thing as well. Use bold, underline, and italics to your advantage. You want to make it easy for your reviewer to read. So if I'm going through it and I can see that something's bolded, it's like, okay, well, that's probably a point that I should pay attention to. Use diagrams and flowcharts. So instead of explaining your timeline, year one, I'm going to do this, or in my first time, I'm going to do this, use a flowchart, use a Gantt chart to be able to demonstrate, because it's always going to be easier again for a reviewer to just glance at that and be like, oh yeah, I understand when they're planning on getting this done. Space is not necessarily there to be filled to the brim. So in your typical discovery project, which is usually like a collaborative research that you'll start applying for mid-career, so once you've been after your PhD, they give you 10 pages, I think, or maybe it's been reduced to 8 pages, but sometimes you'll see grants that literally, are justified and every word is hitting the sides of the pages, and that becomes hard to read, right? Give me a mental break. Give me somewhere where I can also, put a star and go pause. Okay, I'll come back to it and read it later, sort of thing. If my eyes can flow through it a little bit quicker and you're making it easier for me, it's better, rather than just being like, well, I have 10 pages, so I get to shove that many words on the page as well. And you're not going to have to use APA format as well. You'll follow the funding guidelines, but you don't have to now stress about, following whatever the APA requirements are. I still have no idea if they require double spaces or not after full stops. Are there any questions so far while I take a quick? Any thoughts on suitable or unsuitable fonts? I think Arial and Times New Roman are probably the most common ones that you'll see. Funds also will sometimes actually even just ask, will say which font that you should use. I would definitely avoid using anything like Comic Sans or something that's really calligraphy and hard to read. So again, just stick with your Arial, Calibri is the standard one, sometimes in Microsoft Word, and Times New Roman, so making it easy to read. So not to scare you, but this is just exactly what I was talking about in terms of the funding guidelines and rules. This is, I think, 4 pages of 25 for a grant that I'm assisting a researcher on at the moment to apply for. So again, these are for some of the bigger grants, and this is applying for an early career research grant, but just so that you start to make aware that, there are these things that you're going to have to read and pull out. Well, what are the things that I have to and must do? All right, so your research idea is kind of interesting. You've hooked them. They think they want to fund you, but who the heck are you? So on top of obviously your same things where we talk about your number of publications and citation counts, etc., you're also going to have these sort of other metrics that I think you should all really be starting to keep track of so that you can report on them. So your number of publications, yes, is going to be important, but please don't start beating yourself up about it now if you only have 1 or 2 publications out there. If that one publication is because you've developed, something great, or that demonstrates that you're the expert in this new area of research or the specific topic that you're doing, that one publication is going to be the thing that makes you look good to a grant reviewer, right? They're going to be like, okay, this person does so much research in the study of climate change and how people react to that, and they're applying for this award for the research in climate change. That one publication is good for you as well. Keep track of citation counts. Keep track as well of impact factors of the journals that you publish in. So this is also, again, so that they can see sort of like that associated prestige with the journals that you're publishing in. Your H-index, so this is your sort of number of papers that you've published, and then over, I think, like the number of times it's been cited. Please don't quote me on that. I'm not at all the expert on a H-index, but that number will start to grow the more you publish, and the more people start to cite you as well. And so this is something that you'll put in there as a metric of your success. If you haven't already, please set up a Google Scholar profile. It means that it's also very easy for reviewers, or quite frankly anyone else, to find you and then find your publications out there. So I've linked here the Google Scholar where you can start going and creating your profile as well. Remember to update that as well. So if you change universities, if you go somewhere else, that you put your correct email details on there and verify where you are, so that people can continue to follow you. Other metrics that you can also include is things like if you have stuff available on OSF, the Open Science Framework tracks the number of clicks that you get on stuff that you make publicly available. And this is something you can say, hey, we've made our materials available online on OSF and we've had 1,000 people click through it. If that 1,000 clicks is me just being like refreshing the page, it doesn't matter. It's still 1,000 clicks that you get to list on your application. I've never heard of Altmetric and Impact Story, but few people have reported online that they're using this as a way of keeping track of how much your work is being tweeted, being picked up by the media, mentioned on Reddit as well. So wherever the stuff comes from, again, it's like a new avenue for you to be able to say, well, okay, I've only got one publication, but it got, 6,000 views on Twitter and it got retweeted by all these great people and then cause a debate or something like that. So you're really wanting to try to find sort of these other metrics, because the other additional thing here is that's really going to be a benefit is that you're showing impact outside of academia. You're showing that you're not just publishing behind a paywall that no one can read. You're really sort of reaching out there as well. YouTube has counts. If you happen to give a workshop on something, ask for feedback. Like one person says 5 out of 5, that means that attendees reported 5 out of 5 that your workshop was successful. That's how I send a survey to Elise after this and she responds 5 out of 5 and then I'm good. Remember to put everything again into context. So, even if you're only have this one publication, if that's the one publication in this certain area, then that's what's going to make you look good. What are the metrics, like I said, that demonstrate benefit outside of academia? The library also has plenty of resources to help you keep track of this stuff and also to help you measure impact in different ways as well. So that's where I picked up as well on Altmetrics from here. So start keeping track of it is all my advice is. Okay, so I've spoken about these mysterious reviewers who are going to review your grant. So to be aware, each application has a different review system. So for example, in the ARC ones, you're never going to be reviewed by someone from the university that you're at, so Uni Melb, or anyone that you've published with, because obviously it's a conflict of interest. Recently, I helped a student apply for a grant, which I thought was amazing, and the reviews came back and there was someone who clearly understood research, valued the research, totally great, someone who did not understand how experiments work whatsoever, and apparently that resulted in getting rejected, which sucks. But it demonstrates as well that you kind of also have to target sometimes these generalist audience. And so your person reviewing it might just generally know psychology or generally understand research, and you have to be able to sort of pitch to all of these people. You also might get someone who really knows your topic. And so the other thing is you can't get away with explaining, missing details or something like that. And again, this kind of harps back to my topic about make sure that you don't miss any obvious flaws or something that you do need to raise in your research as well. So this is really kind of different to a paper that you would usually write where you know that experts in your area are going to be reviewing it. When it comes to grants, it's, experts in something, but what? Not necessarily always your area as well. The other thing to be aware of is there are usually more grants than there are reviewers, and it's a very tight timeline sometimes as well. So, you know, sometimes the way that I got taught this was, imagine that you as a reviewer have 30 grants, which are all over 40 pages to review in 4 weeks' time, whilst juggling your own workload, family life, and currently being in lockdown, okay? So this is what we mean by making it really easy for them to read and to follow. You need to write your grant for the most sleep-deprived dog trying to drink coffee out there that you have, okay? The easier that you can make it, the better it will be for you, trust me. So again, like those mental breaks in terms of the spaces as well, I really do recommend. Know your dates. So the reason I recommended that you sign up to mailing lists is so that you can also hopefully get updated on any changes. So if they have, for example, decided to extend the date for deadline, or if they have, you know, frequently asked questions that have now been uploaded to the website. But always go back to the website and check things. So I recently actually got caught out with this. A grant I wanted to apply for, a sister researcher applying for, was originally due at the end of July, and they just suddenly changed it to mid-July, and there's no way that we can make that deadline, sort of thing. And there was no update about it. It literally was just the website was suddenly like, okay, this is happening. So make sure that you kind of have some sort of weekly check-ins, and again, talking about time. So even if that deadline suddenly, you know, comes a lot closer than it should have been, if you've been sort of prepared before that, you'll be okay. Along with due dates, note when you might hear back from the granting agency, and try to check in if this is really overdue, sort of thing. And again, follow on Twitter and see their website. You don't want to be waiting anxiously around forever to find out your results. And also, I've definitely worked with people who've had the unfortunate incident of, it's been a really long time, I'll check in with the agency, and only for the agency to respond back and say, oh yeah, sorry, no, you were rejected, we just forgot to tell you. Or my other favorite one is sometimes they'll send you a letter. Why in this digital age they think it's a good idea to send you a letter? But yeah, so you end up waiting 3 months after that to get a letter to your house that informs you that your grant was rejected. Joy. The sucky part. You're most likely going to get very minimal feedback to sometimes no feedback on your grant application. So again, coming back to the point that there's too many grants, few assessors, or not enough time for them, their feedback might be very high level, where they just sort of say in general, these are the things that we didn't like in some grants. Or it also sometimes can be just a super generic message that says, sorry, you've been unsuccessful, and you get nothing more than that. Sometimes they're upfront about this. So sometimes a lot of funding agencies will have on their website where they say, we will not be providing any feedback, so you need to be aware of that. But if you're unsuccessful and you sort of really thought, I think, that your grant was a good fit for this place, you could try to email them and get some feedback back. My advice, though, regardless, is don't get too disheartened about this. There are some people that would argue that grants have become pretty much a lottery system, and so you are sometimes super successful and get to celebrate that, and other times you're unsuccessful and there's no real logical reason as to why. So get what feedback you can on board, make the changes, again, get the advice from your supervisors, from colleagues that you work with, etc., because they're probably the people that are going to give you the good concrete feedback to help you improve on your grant anyways. If you can't get personal feedback, or they made it clear that they're not going to be able to provide you with any of this, try to ask for other types of feedback so that you can get better insight into this funding agency. So what's their current success rate? Or can they at least tell you, well, how many people did you have apply and how many did you have funded? So that you can know, okay, well, did they only fund one, but only 3 people applied for it? So, okay. Or did they fund 1 person and 400 people applied for it? You want to be able to get that information. What are the common themes of research that they saw? So particularly if you're applying for something that's really a lot more broad and open, like just a general call out to psychology research, they might be able to tell you, well, this year we had a bit more interest in supporting research in X area, sort of thing. So then you can know, okay, well, it wasn't me. What stood out in the winning applications and what stood out in the ones that were rejected. So sometimes they will provide you advice to be able to say, you know, we really saw in the winning applications that they had a clear understanding of the forward program of the research, and really what we found in the rejected applications where they were just asking too much money for what they wanted to do. So And these are, again, the things that you can sort of tailor in the research that you do. You can also find out who were the reviewers. So as I talked earlier about, there was clearly someone who was an expert in research and someone who wasn't. If you can get more information just generally about who they might call for reviewers, that will also help you tailor it in future. And if they don't have already this information on their website, what funding opportunities will exist next year, and are they going to open up anything else? So if they have on their website, obviously, yes, this is going to continue on a yearly basis, that's fine. But, if it's something that's new or novel or doesn't have too much information, you want to find out so that well, is this something that you are going to curate a little bit more so that you can support it in future, or is this just something that you now shift to a different granting agency? All right. Let's get to the complicated, less fun stuff, because obviously everything up until this point has been super fun and interesting, right? So, budgets. You're actually going to be told that there are certain things that you can ask for. So sometimes it might just say like, okay, you're going to get awarded $5,000 for your research. They don't necessarily provide you with, okay, you can only ask for X, Y, and Z. But there are other grants that are going to be like, well, you need to explain where the money is going towards, and there are only certain things that we will allow you to put the money towards. And then the question is, well, what do you actually want? And so, this might be the very first time that you have to start thinking about, well, how much does it cost to, have a website up with your research, or how much does access to an experimental program cost for access to it, sort of thing. So again, this is like even more research that you have to now do. The other thing to be aware of is that there are these fun things called indirect costs. So this is like keeping the lights on at the university, paying for leave, superannuation, and it's pretty much a multiplier that the university puts on top of what you're asking for. So if you're, for example, asking for $1,000, currently in this year, you now have to multiply that by 1.7, and so then you're asking for whatever $1,000 is multiplied by 1.7. There are certain grants that don't allow to do this. So they'll explicitly say no indirect costs can be asked from this grant, and that's fine. The university is aware of that, and you just need to make that clear. But if it's not, then yes, the university will be asking for that, because it's not just enough to be able to, pay for your RA. They need to also pay for the space and the air conditioning we don't get, for example, in the RBB building. So these are, again, things that you might have never even thought about, and I know that I'm still struggling with. And also the other thing to be aware of is, the post-COVID world, but quite frankly, in general, the world we live in, this multiplier is increasing. So as you can see, in the year 2025, it's going to be 2.5. So, costs are increasing left, right, and center. The thing that I really want to make clear though here as well is this stuff takes a lot of time to wrap your head around as well. So you're going to of course get excited about all the minutiae detail of your research, and you're going to forget that you're actually asking for a certain amount of money for something. So again, harping back to my point about time, make sure that you leave time for this. Budget cuts, be aware that the ARC, so DECRAs, for example, are funded to 94%, so you don't get the full 100% that you ask for. Discovery projects, so these are the larger collaborative grants, 70%. And the reality of the post-COVID world is that we're going to see maybe less money coming out, or also sort of more diversified funding. So instead of giving one person $10,000, they might want to give 10 people $1,000. So these are some of the realities that we're going to have to face, because you're not always going to get what you ask for. The other thing as well is there's going to be signatures and approvals that you're going to go through depending on the grant that you're applying for. So sometimes this will be outlined for you as well in the funding guidelines, where they say that they need your head of department or the DVCR to sign off on your grant. Sometimes they want to be able to as well. This is usually done internally through RIC. So they'll review your grant, or at least review the guidelines, and then they'll sign off on it. I've also had definitely instances where someone more senior has been like, okay, well, I want to see sort of what your grant application looks like. In other instances, it's really just you need their signature so that they're aware that you're applying for this. Be aware of your timeframes. So this is both determined by the grant. So how long is the funding actually for? Is it just a monetary sum that they hand over to you and it doesn't really matter when you spend it? and also be aware of any sort of deadlines in terms of the funding. So for example, a lot of the ARC grants are 3 years of funding, and if you get to the end of your 3 years and you haven't spent a certain amount of money, you don't get to keep that. That's recouped back by them. So you'll also probably all see your supervisors at some stage do a burn of cash in their final year of their grant. Keep in mind as well that even if you're successful in a grant, managing it all can take a lot of work sometimes. So you have your deliverables, the things that you actually said you're going to provide, reporting requirements. So these are sometimes to the granting agencies. They want to, like, you know, say, what have you actually done? How the funds are deposited to you and managed. I know of people, for example, who have won international awards, for example, from the SBSB, and then we're told, like, okay, well, we want to deposit it, but from an American bank account to an Australian one is difficult. And then we're like, oh, well, we'll just send you a check. So who even knows what to do with those things? So getting paid in foreign currencies as well is going to mean that, you know, depending on how the Australian dollar is performing, you're not quite getting as much as you would have liked, or you're doing better, I guess, if you get it in US dollars. Who do you talk to about all of this stuff? And I apologize, I'm gonna like speed through these last couple of slides, so knowledge of time and want to be available for questions. But always start with your supervisory team. So is this the right time for you? Is this the grant that you should be applying for and aiming? I've linked here the RIC team so that you can see that there are people over there that can also assist you at different levels of the grant, but mostly providing information. RIC, let me be clear, won't necessarily be the one to review your grant and provide you with any feedback on it whatsoever. You have to sort your own people for that. NDHS grants, so if you are considering applying for something, it's probably good to flag it with these people. So that's their email there. And me, my email address is there. Please feel free, if you are interested in applying for something or you want additional opinions after you talk to your supervisory team, I would be more than happy to help you. Again, one of my real big aims, I think, for this year is to assist PhD students more in applying for some of these different prizes and awards. And I would also just love to know what you're actually aiming for so that we can start collating these resources as well. All right, the harsh truth. So small prizes and awards very rarely list what their success rates are. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as obviously it's going to fluctuate in the number of people that are applying for it. Is it a niche area? So there's only a certain amount of people that can apply for it, etc. But the thing that to be aware of definitely is that the number of applicants is definitely set to increase. And I've kind of seen that across the board in grants that people are applying for. Any amount of funding that is available is going to decrease thanks to this sort of COVID world that we live in now. So kind of a harsh reality, I think, that we have to start dealing with. Here are some success rates for different funds. So Marie Curie, for example, has a 10 to 30% success rate. Overall, it was 14%. So this is a postdoc that you can apply for. In international applicants are available to apply for this at any stage after their PhD. DECRAs as well, so you can see here, you know, over 1,000 applicants. Yes, certain were removed for being sort of unsuccessful in terms of eligibility requirements, but it's got a 17% success rate. So these are sort of some of the things that you need to be aware of. Again, I think sort of to guide yourself and prepare yourself for this, because again, it might be seen as sometimes as a lottery system, and why you're successful on one grant and unsuccessful in another is going to be this mystery that we're never really going to solve. I'll just leave this in the slides as just a flag to you to see where the government divides up its funding. So you can see big discovery projects get a lot more funding, for example, than supporting early career researchers, unfortunately. Here are some additional resources. So on the, I'm just providing all of these things that you can start taking a look at. How people apply for it, advice on grant writing, and also, you know, sort of the secrets behind. I see a question, do people typically apply for the Marie Curie at the same stage as their DECRA, or do people apply straight out of their PhD? So I think similar timing between the Marie Curie and the DECRA. I would say
I might be able to answer that one because I've had both of them. Marie Curie is generally, it's more like focused on the trajectory, like the match you can make between yourself and your supervisor. And so applicants, you can get it straight out of your PhD. I know someone who got it with no publications, but a really strong record of a suitable PhD project. I applied for it, I think, a year out of my PhD and got it. So I think you can go earlier for it than you would usually go for DECRA.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah,
that's really helpful.
I've definitely already spoken about postdoctoral fellowships when we had the Understanding the Academic Job Market, and those slides are available up on the Hub website as well. Here's a couple more fellowships that you can start looking into and information. Really, especially if you're considering this pathway of postdocs, which are kind of grant applications anyways, is to look into the researchers that you would like to work with and what opportunities are available with them as well. Make sure again that you write a really well tailored email, so not just a very broad one, to people that you want to work with, expressing your interest in what opportunities are available there. So it might be really difficult for you to search for grants in Hungary, but if you know that there's a researcher over there that you want to work with, or a postdoc that's gone over there, you can contact them for information as well. Your supervisor also should definitely be helping you crafting some of these emails, and might have more information as well on international grants. So my final advice, start searching for awards and prizes now. At least sort of start dabbling your feet into what is out there. Do some research so that you again really need to balance, is that worth your time investing into grants? Don't sink months into an application where it might go nowhere. So if they have a super low success rate that you're aware of, or if you've gotten feedback from people and it's not going to do too well, the more grants you read, the more feedback you're going to get, and the better that yours will be. So get your hands on whatever you possibly can. And your supervisory team really is there for you. So ask for their past applications, get as much advice and connections as you can before you start diving into this world. All right, apologies. I always think it's going to be under time and then I blab for way too long. Thank you so much to everyone that was stuck with me for this full hour. I'm going to hang around if you have any questions, but if you need to leave, that's totally fine. I'm going to continue to make jokes about Victoria and COVID. Please laugh when you can and take care of your mental health during this time. And thanks for coming along. Any feedback, questions can also be emailed to me. If we want to do a grants round 2, I'd be more than happy to do that later in the year. But I'm going to shut up now in case there are any questions.